The open forum, where diverse and difficult opinions can be freely expressed. Where issues that are brushed under the carpet are openly discussed. Our journey entails starting conversations around issues that the world is turning a blind eye to. Let the story be told by the sufferer himself or herself. Unravel the politics behind the silence, by bringing the stakeholders on one platform and keep pushing for resolutions. The open forum, where resolution meets resolve, and silence is heard.
Hello, I'm Mandy Clark, and I will be your moderator for this discussion. And as a foreign correspondent, I spent many years in Afghanistan for CBS News. My goal was always to shine a spotlight on issues, particularly social issues, that were happening halfway across the world for my audience, and to try to make them connect and care about it. Now, I really applaud the ethos behind the open forum, which is trying to do just that, bring to light and openly discuss issues that have been silenced and ignored for too long. Now, there will be a Q&A session after the panelists share their experiences and expertise. And we really want this to be a discussion. So if you have any questions along the way, please pop them into the comment sections and we'll put it to the panel at the end. Now, today's topic is the treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China. Now, it's always important to get all sides of the debate. And we, of course, did reach out to the Chinese embassy in London to see if they would have someone available for the discussion or even a statement on the issue. But so far, we have not had a reply for our request. But we do have a fantastic panel of experts who can speak knowledgeably and passionately about the issue. Professor Ryan Thum is a historian of Islam in China. We have Nuris Mingal, who has a personal first-hand account of the situation for Uyghurs in China. Rahima Mahmood is the UK project director of the World Uyghur Congress, and Michael Pollock is a barrister and founder of the Lawyers for Uyghur Right to Talk. So let's jump straight in to the discussion with historian Professor Ryan Thum. Now, his research and teaching are generally concerned with the overlap of China and the Muslim world. And his award-winning book, The Sacred Roots of Uyghur History, argues that Uyghurs and their place in China can only be understood by their long-standing traditions. So his current project is Islamic China, and it's a re-examination of Chinese Islam. So I don't think there's any better person to give us an overview of Uyghur culture and the situation they find themselves in now.
Thank you so much. I suppose the first question that needs to be answered in any overview like this for a global audience is who are the Uyghurs and what is their relationship to the People's Republic of China? The Uyghurs are, just to describe them broadly, an ethnic group that is overwhelmingly Muslim, although there are, of course, some Uyghur Christians and a fair number of Uyghur atheists. They speak a language that's very close to the Uzbek language. They speak a Turkic language. It's easy for Uyghurs to learn Turkish and easy for people in Turkey to learn Uyghur. They're very close. And just in general, Uyghurs share a lot more culturally with their neighbors in former Soviet Central Asia than they do with the Chinese or the Han Chinese, the ethnic majority of China. Now, the reason the Uyghurs are a part of China is that in 1760, the Qing Empire, whose borders the People's Republic has largely inherited, conquered this region. And since then, of course, there have been times when the indigenous inhabitants, Uyghurs and Kazakhs and others, have been happy with outsider rule, and there have been other times where they've been unhappy with it and rebelled. There have been brief independent states, but for the most part, the region has been controlled by China-based states. Now, today, the reason they're getting so much attention is that the Chinese government, after a good 30 years of slowly increasing restrictions on Uyghur movement and cultural practices has made a hard turn toward assimilationist policies. And they seem to have made a decision to essentially, as far as possible, turn the Uyghurs culturally into Han Chinese citizens. The tools that they have used for this include the following. The one that has brought the most attention probably is the internment of over 1 million Uyghurs in what the Chinese government originally called transformation education camps. And then when they started to get pushback from the global community, they changed the names to vocational training centers. These are extrajudicial confinements in where people undergo indoctrination. That 1 million represents roughly 10% of the Uyghur population. At the same time, children of people who've been put into these camps go to residential schools where they're essentially raised as Han Chinese children. We also have disproportionate restrictions on birth, forced sterilizations. All of it is enabled by an incredible system of surveillance, which is partly automated. There are cameras everywhere, security cameras everywhere, and they are linked through a software system called IJOP, which automatically sends notices, processes the data of where people are and who they are, and automatically sends warnings to police saying this person might commit a crime in the future. You should go check them out. And a huge percentage of people who are flagged get sent to the internment camps or to prisons. Along with this, we've more recently seen that the internment camps have moved people to different settings. Some have actually been released. A very large number, hundreds of thousands, have been moved into prisons through sham trials with sentences. And then also a similarly large number that we're not quite as sure how many have been put into forced labor working in factories. So you have dentists and computer engineering people now working in factories doing sort of menial wage labor. Now, people have often asked me over the last couple of years, why am I just hearing about this now? And the answer is that while there has been, increasing repression of the Uyghurs over the last 30 years, what we're seeing now really developed very quickly. There were some plans for some elements that you can see of 2014. There's a new regional leader that is appointed in 2016, but it's really only since 2017 that we've seen the actual implementation of this mass internment campaign. So things changed very quickly, and it took a while for observers to catch up. Now, we know about it because first, Uyghurs themselves were sounding the alarm. We're talking about relatives disappearing. And eventually journalists started picking up, and then academics started sifting through the evidence to give a good picture of it. That evidence is extraordinary. This is these are crimes against humanity playing out in real time with more ability of the world to see it than anything like it has happened before. And that's because the Chinese government has been it uses the internet to do its work. And while it's been trying to deny what's happening to the outside world, to local internal audiences on local government websites and local government social media accounts, they're actually posting much of the documentation of what they're doing. So, for example, they made open calls for contractors to build these internment camps with clear lists go in them, electric cattle prods, barbed wire, security bars for windows, things like this, which make it clear we're not just doing vocational training. They even put the Xinjiang Justice Department even fully posted pictures of men in these camps with the signs saying which camp it was. So we have an incredible amount of data, and of course we have the testimony of the small number of survivors who managed to get out of the country. Now, part of the topic of this event today is the question of silence and what is the world doing? And the answer is, for the most part, not much. The U.S. has placed sanctions on individuals related to this. The U.S. has barred the import of certain goods, but the U.S. is the only state to do a real practical response, and that's because it's pretty much the only state that has more geopolitical power than China. And before I wrap up, I'll just briefly say that I hear a lot of people saying, where is the Muslim majority world on this? Why aren't Muslim majority states speaking up? Well, some have. Albania has. Most have not. But we could say the same thing for where is the human rights promoting world on this? Where is Sweden? Where is Germany? When are they going to say something more than sort of mild condemnations and actually put some strong pressure and public pressure on the Chinese government? The silence of the rest of the world is not really restricted to one cultural zone. And I will wrap it up right there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Now, to fully understand the effects of the policies that we hear, what's happening there, we're going to hear from Nurisman Gul. Now, she's an MBA student and mother who's currently living in Istanbul, but her family has been missing for the past 3 years. Nurisman, thank you very much for joining us and telling us your story.
Thank you very much for the organizers and for giving me the chance to share my family story. My name is Nursman Abdurrashid, and I am born and raised in Kashgar, and I do my bachelor in Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. And in 2015, I came to Turkey to study for my master's degree in business administration. Currently, I am working as a marketing executive. And this is the photo I took when I about to fly to Turkey in 2015. At that time, everyone is very hopeful, and I was give a promise for myself that I will back home with my PhD degree and with my great success and make my family members proud. But unfortunately, I couldn't make it because since 18th of June 2017, I lost contact with my family members. In our last call, we was talk about my master graduation thesis because I was finished it and I was about to present it in 2 weeks. And I was also about to present my first research paper in international conference launched in Montenegro. Everyone was so happy, but we never know that was our last phone conversation. Since then, I can't reach any of my family members, relatives, and the friends. And I was keep waiting because at that time I was never know they were taken to the concentration camps. After I heard thousands of testimony about the people living abroad, they are giving testimony about their family members. And I started to worry about, but I still can't get any kind of information. In 2018, I got just a simple message that all of my family members are arrested. There is no one left in my home. And that was the darkest day in my life. And I started to talk on social media. I keep writing to the Chinese officials, embassies, and I write to the human rights organizations, but I can't get any kind of information. In 15th of June 2020, I get a phone call from the Chinese embassy in Turkey that they informed me that all of my family members are imprisoned. This is my father, Abdurrashid Tohti. He is 54 years old. He was arrested in 2017 and sentenced 16 years, 11 months. This is my mother, Tajgul Qadir. She is 51 years old. She is also arrested in 2017 and sentenced 13 years. This is my elder brother, Ahmetcan Abdurrashid. He is 34 years old. He is the father of 3 beautiful children, and he's a business owner of 3 auto spare part shops. And he is also arrested and sentenced 7 years. And this gentleman is my younger brother, Muhammad Ali Abdurrashid, and he was joined to my brother's business after high school, and he is also doing the auto spare part business with my brother. He is a father of 2 beautiful child, and he is also arrested in 2017 and sentenced 15 years 11 months. And I was keep asking the Chinese embassy that what's their crime, and are they have any proof that can justify the accusation, but still they can't offer me any kind of evidence. And I can sure that my family members punish it for just being Uyghur, just sent me and my sister to study abroad for be a successful person and dedicate to our nation. Yes, it's really unfair. And today is the World Human Rights Day. And in this day, I really hope the world remember the Uyghurs who are arbitrarily detained and torturing in the concentration camp and the prisons. And I really hope the human rights organizations stand with the Uyghurs and stand against the worst crime against the humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nur Osman. It takes a lot of courage to share that with us. So thank you. Next, we will hear from Rahima Mahmood, who has too been personally affected by the situation in China. She is a human rights activist and award-winning translator of the poignant prison memoir, The Land Drenched in Tears. Her latest work includes working as a consultant and translator for the ITV Emmy Award-winning documentary, Undercover Inside China's Digital Gulag, and a translator for the latest BBC documentary, China, A New World Order. Currently, she is the UK project director for the World Uyghur Congress.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you so much for Ryan Thumb and Nursiman share her story to bring lights about what is happening to my people. I was brought up in a large religious family, and the discrimination and the persecution of the Uyghur people has a long history. As a Uyghur from my childhood right up until I left my homeland in 2000, I experienced frequent discrimination and witnessed brutal crackdowns on moderate dissenting voices. One of the most serious of these incidents was the Gulja massacre of 1997, when police opened fire on a peaceful demonstration calling for the release of a group of Uyghur social activists. And a 1999 report by Amnesty International, Gross Violations of Human Rights in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, documented the killing of many of these protesters by police and the widespread torture and up to 190 executions that took place during the crackdown that followed the incident. So the situation, to understand the situation now, I believe people need to understand also the historical situation. And we know since the Chinese, the CCP occupied region in 1949, the disasters never stopped. From the time soon after 1955, the promised the Uyghur Autonomous Region, but it has never honored. The autonomy was never honored to the Uyghurs. From the rightist movement in 1958, then the Cultural Revolution, then breathing space, I would say, just brief normality that we enjoyed during the 80s. And then from the 1990s, early 90s, soon after the students' democratic movement, the situation became worsened. And we know that the whole China, the human rights situation throughout China became worsened then, but particularly the situation in Tibet and the East Turkestan was extremely difficult. So it was that 1997, that Gulja massacre, that I made a decision to leave my country, because I could see that there is no improvement. It will only get worse. And my son was 1.5 years old at that time. I know many of my relatives and friends, their family members were arrested. And one of my relatives, 3 sons were arrested at that time and given very lengthy prison sentence. And I didn't want my son grow up and ended up in prison one day. And I believe I made the right decision. And since 2000, I came to the UK. I have been speaking up and trying to raise awareness about the human rights violations against my people by the Chinese government. Over the past few years, I have been, for the last 20 years, I couldn't go back to my country, but at least I was able to speak to my sisters and my brothers over the telephone. But then that was cut off from October 2016. And then last conversation I had with my brother was in January 2017, and who told me, leave us in God's hands, and we will leave you in God's hands too. So my work as an interpreter and translator brings me first-hand information on those who have suffered in the notorious 21st century internment camps, as well as the heart-wrenching accounts of mothers and fathers who have lost their children, young and old. Every Uyghur family has a similar story, one more horrible than the next, as a result of the brutal policies, which I believe amount to genocide, and that have been taking place since 2017, shielded from the view of the international community. And the most painful part of my job is that I cannot offer those in pain and suffering of any words of comfort and hope. And we just heard from Nursimangul how her family, the entire family members, are being imprisoned without any legal reason. And also I worked as a consultant and a translator for the documentary Undercover Inside China's Digital Gulag by Robin Banwell. And the information was gathered both through interviews with people who had experienced the camps and through an undercover reporter within the Uyghur region. In one part, there is an extraordinary conversation between the undercover reporter and the Chinese official in Urumqi. The official commented, "The authorities say it is a special situation here. What is happening is excessive and too extreme. The police look at Uyghurs with suspicion. If a Uyghur refuses to be checked or asks why, they just lock them up. There is no procedure." So the undercover reporter asked, "Do Uyghurs feel their human rights are being violated?" And the reply was, "They don't have human rights. It is not about violation. They just don't have human rights." So we know already that up to 3 million Uyghurs now incarcerated in camps. And those who are not in camps, they are not free. And the people like myself and Nursiman living in free countries, we don't feel free and we are suffering. And so on this day, on the Human Rights Day, I also urge the world leaders, the human rights organizations, to honor their obligations and to help the Uyghurs to put this end genocide as their priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rahima. That was very passionate and thoughtful. And finally, let's hear from Michael Pollock. He can tell us more about the international justice and action that is happening for the Uyghurs. And he is on the executive committee of the Human Rights Lawyers Association and represents some Uyghur families in court, as well as being the founder for Lawyers for the Uyghurs' Right to Talk. Michael?
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of slides to show to you to give you something to look at. I find when I talk about the law, sometimes people can switch off a little bit, but I will run through the slides. I've got a short video to show you as well. Hopefully that explains things in regards to the law and what's happening. Who am I? I'm a barrister based in London. I work in international law, criminal law, and human rights law. I started up Lawyers for Uyghur Rights as a group to pool resources and ideas about how to counter the mass oppression of the Uyghur people. And it's mostly focused on the Uyghur people, but we shouldn't forget the other Turkish people in the area, like Tajiks and Uzbeks and Kazakhs, who are also subject to lots of these practices as well. So they're all having a really difficult time there under intense repression by the Chinese state. So if you're interested in Lawyers for Uyghur Rights, please have a look at the website, lawyersforuygurrights.com, and you can get involved if you're a lawyer or a law student and you'd like to do more about this issue. Justice Abroad is an organization I run, and we have lots of Uyghur clients. We make submissions to the United Nations to try to help them. Nursa Mangal's family is one of our clients, so we've made submissions to the United Nations on their behalf as well. In regards to international law, the two main international crimes we're looking at, and Ryan mentioned them at the start of the speech, which was fantastic. He spoke about crimes against humanity and genocide. And this is Philippe Sands, QC's book, East-West Street, which is fantastic on the history of these two crimes. And I do recommend people to go and have a look at that book as well. It tells a fantastic personal family history of his as well. In short, these two international crimes were developed by two Jewish, Polish academics or lawyers, Raphael Lemkin, who decided that genocide, looking at attacks on the group, was what was important, whilst Hirsch Lauterpark, who was perhaps more famous at the time, he decided on looking at individual rights, and his work moved more into the kind of crimes against humanity sphere, and he helped develop the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What are these crimes? What do people mean when they say crimes against humanity? Because it's obviously very strong words, but it's quite helpful to have a legal definition about what we're talking about. And I've got the legal definition there. I'm not going to read all through it, but it's a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of that attack. And you've got a whole list of different things. They're murder, enslavement, deportation, torture, rape. Obviously it's not just a one-off event against somebody, which would be a domestic crime. What really elevates it to being an international crime is really the large scale of it. And when you look at the evidence about what's happening to the Uyghur and other Turkish people, I think it's without doubt that crimes against humanity are taking place there, which are international crimes. They're prohibited by customary international law, which means that no state is allowed to do them. And then on to genocide, which recent evidence seems to be indicating that a genocide is taking place against the Uyghur and other Turkish people as well. You've got the definition there from the Genocide Convention, which is any of these acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group, killing members of the group, making it very difficult for them to sustain themselves as a group, forcible transfer, those kind of things is what you're looking at with the Genocide Convention. In regards to a hierarchy in international law, lots of people say genocide is a crime of crimes because it's about attacking a group, and people think back to the Holocaust and the attacks on the Armenian people as well, and that's really the kind of pinnacle of international criminal law. I think there may be some force in that argument, but crimes against humanity, for me, should shock anyone, as the name suggests. Sometimes people are a little bit reticent to name things as genocide, and that's for a few reasons. One of the main ones is it has a special intent. you need to do these acts, not just intending to do these acts, but also intending to destroy in whole or in part the group. So it's not the easiest thing to prove. It's a bit more difficult to prove than crimes against humanity. The second reason states are often a bit reticent to say something amounts to genocide is under the Genocide Convention, there's a duty of states to prevent it from happening wherever it happens in the world. So it gives, there is a moral and legal obligation to actually do something, which is why states are a little bit reticent to call something a genocide. I know the Canadian Parliament recently has come out, or a parliamentary committee there, and said this amounts to genocide, which is very welcome. And it seems that the rest of the world is kind of following in that direction. The evidence of genocide, really, Adrian Zenz, he brought out this evidence. And when I say brought it out, Ryan very helpfully at the start said how good the Chinese authorities are at documenting their own crimes. So they put out public tenders for cattle prods, which was one of the main bits of evidence which happened at the start, and people were working out what's actually happening here. So it's a very interesting point with the crimes which are taking place, these international crimes. The Chinese state is collecting evidence which can be used against them to show what's actually happening. Watchers will remember at the start, China denied the existence of these camps totally. They said they're not here at all. And then it's kind of moved to a position now where they're saying they're education camps, and lots of critics of the Uyghur people said the claims about 1 million people being in camps, are overblown. But then recently China came out and said at least 1.4 million every year of Uyghurs passing into these camps. So the evidence is there, and it actually comes from the Chinese state. And what Dr. Adrian Zenz has done, he simply translated that evidence and presented it. So it's not anyone creating evidence, it's their own evidence. And what he's looking at is birth controls, forced abortions, which are measures which are meant to stop or prevent an ethnic group and a religious group from continuing. And the evidence seems to be there. It's also possible that the torture is directed in a way which is meant to destroy the Uyghur people and other Turkish people in the region.
This doctor is speaking out to try and right the wrongs of her past. She says back home in China, she spent her career performing forced abortions on women from her community or sterilizing them on behalf of the Chinese government.
In 20 years, I participated in at least 500 to 600 operations, including forced contraception, forced abortion and sterilization, and forced removal of wombs.
Hers is horrific testimony, which stands at odds with her medical oath to do no harm, but fits with a birth rate which has fallen 60%.
We'd go village to village, gather all the women and herd them onto tractors. Young women were fitted with contraceptive devices. Pregnant women would have to have an abortion, then sterilization. We even inserted birth control implants into women's upper arms to prevent pregnancy. This is how the government persecuted the Uyghur women.
She eventually fled to Turkey, and it was there she told me about abortions carried out at full term, babies born alive then killed by injection, others thrown away whilst in the final moments of life.
The clear intention was ethnic cleansing. We were asked to believe this was part of the Communist Party's population control plan. At the time, I thought it was my job. I felt sorry to see the killing of a small baby, but I never fully realized its damage to the nation. Now I feel such regret.
So I think when you watch that shocking video, you realize what we're kind of looking at here. There's an intent to destroy the Uyghur people in regards to birth control, forced abortions, and those kind of procedures, which is very worrying because it appears like genocide is taking place there. You would have noticed in that video, the voice was Rahima. Rahima did the translation there, so you heard her voice there as well. So what can be done legally? Because we know that these crimes are taking place, and we know who's responsible for them. And there's a number of legal fora that we should just have a quick look through. So on this last slide, we have the International Court of Justice, which is there to deal with matters between states in international law. And under the Genocide Convention, states can bring a case against another state saying that they're committing genocide, and the International Court of Justice makes that decision. At the moment, you've got a number of cases which are taking place. There's the well, in regards to genocide, there's the case, the Gambia against Myanmar, which has been brought obviously by the Gambia, but supported by other states as well, which is currently going through the court process to decide if Myanmar committed genocide against the Rohingya people. Previously, you had Bosnia against Serbia, and that case, the International Court of Justice decided that Serbia was in breach of the Genocide Convention by failing to prevent the commission of genocide against the Bosnian people by Serbian nationalist forces from Bosnia. So there is that international forum there, but why is no one taking China to this forum? Well, it's not simply just because of the politics behind it. In the genocide convention, China entered a reservation, which means that you can't actually take them before that court, which is worrying, because that would be the proper place for this to be decided, whether China as a state is responsible for genocide. The International Criminal Court's another really interesting one. Based in The Hague, it looks at individual criminal responsibility. So the ICJ is looking at state responsibility. The International Criminal Court is looking at individual responsibility. Now, states agree to be a party. They sign up to the Rome Statute, and they agree to be a party to the International Criminal Court. And it's only nationals of those parties or crimes which happen within one of the states which are a member of the court. And now more and more states are becoming a member of the court, so it has an increased reach. In regards to jurisdiction, in the case where they were looking at forcing the Rohingya people from Myanmar into Bangladesh, where they escaped, in that case, Bangladesh is a state party, it's part of the court, and Myanmar is not. The pretrial chamber in that case decided that the deportation occurs, the crime against humanity of deportation occurs across two borders. So when the Rohingya people are forced through very terrible treatment in Myanmar and they're forced to flee to Bangladesh, the crime is committed in both states, and therefore the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction. Similar submissions have been made to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in regards to people being sent from Thailand or from Tajikistan returned back into China, where international crimes are committed against them. We're not sure if the International Criminal Court will take that up. Another option is domestic courts. Under the Genocide Convention, states are supposed to set up domestic provisions for preventing genocide, and in lots of states they have provisions where people can be prosecuted for genocide no matter where the genocide actually takes place. So that's another possible option which can be considered. A very interesting development in the United Kingdom, and it was in the House of Lords this week, that there was an amendment made to the trade bill which states that the UK will not be able to enter into any new trade agreements with countries who are committing genocide. And you may be sitting at home thinking, well, of course we shouldn't be entering into trade agreements with countries who are committing genocide. And I agree with you 100%. But as far as I know, this is the first time in any country where such a law has been sought to be put in place. So the amendment was successful in the House of Lords. It will go back to the House of Commons, the lower house in the United Kingdom. And it's thought that will be successful. And we hope that from that, this new provision stopping trade deals happening with states committing genocide, like the People's Republic of China, will spread out throughout the world. So different countries around the world will adopt very similar provisions. Just quickly here, I've got Jeffrey Nice QC's tribunal, which will consider matters. It's a people's tribunal, so it will consider the evidence and it will come to a decision as to what the evidence shows. Does it show that crimes against humanity are taking place? Does it show that genocide is taking place as well? Just quickly on the last three there, Ad hoc tribunals are tribunals which have been set up for similar gross breaches of human rights in the past. Now, usually tribunals come from the Security Council, and of course China would block that, as would perhaps Russia as well. So tribunals such as the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the Tribunal for Yugoslavia were developed by the Security Council, put in place by the Security Council. There has been tribunals which have been developed by the General Assembly, such as the Tribunal for Sierra Leone. Now, the amount of countries which are speaking out against what's happening to the Uyghur people is slowly rising. So there may come a stage where the General Assembly votes to set up a tribunal to properly consider the individual criminal responsibility of those who are involved in these international crimes. Magnitsky sanctions are another good way of trying to seek some sort of justice against these people as well. And the stretch of these type of sanctions, which sanction individuals who are involved in gross breaches of human rights, is getting larger and larger. The United Kingdom recently developed a human rights global sanctions regime, and the European Union this week has developed a very similar regime. So those sanctions can be very useful in targeting individuals who are involved in these kind of crimes. I put down here the Olympics as well, because there's always international forum to make applications and submissions in regards to what's taking place. And Lawyers for Uyghur Rights, we made submissions to the Ethics Commission of the International Olympic Committee, saying that it's against the Olympic Charter in regards to what's happening to the Uyghur people and other Turkish people to hold the Winter Olympics in China. So we made that submission, and they didn't properly answer that submission. So we're pushing on that as well. So there are legal options to look at, but of course the political will needs to be there as well. So I ask everyone who's watching, please do push your local political leaders to do more on this issue. We always say this should never happen again, and it is happening right now.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now it's time to open up the conversation a bit more. So if you do have those questions, please put it in the comment section. And I can see there's already some questions there. Someone with the handle 1018MB wants to know, what has been the response and support from the wider Muslim world?
I don't know if Ryan wants to jump in, or if I think Ryan already mentioned that the whole world can do more on this issue. The one of the problems with dealing with China when it commits gross, huge breaches of individual human rights around the world is their economic clout. So countries are very reticent to stand up against them, and the Organization of Islamic Conference has done very little and spoken up. But there are Muslim groups around the world. I know in Indonesia they've been quite vocal, Muslim groups there, standing up against their own government, who has really not said very much about what's happening. So there is, and of course China is putting pressure on states around the world not to speak up about what's happening.
I would add one detail that's quite interesting, which is that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, formerly called the Organization of Islamic Conference, actually initially created a fact-finding committee to report on what was happening in the Uyghur region, and therefore gross violations of human rights were happening, and that the Chinese government was targeting Muslims and preventing the practice of Islam among Uyghurs. That committee's findings were then sort of reversed by the larger political, more politically significant body, which then issued, instead of the statement of the fact-finding committee, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation issued a statement supporting the Chinese government and saying that this mass internment was actually a good way to fight terrorism. Yeah, so you can sort of see the effects of political pressure there overcoming the actual opinions of the actors involved.
Wow. And we have one from Darren Jones, who's asked specifically, I know, Michael, you spoke about reaching out to your local member of parliament, but he wants to know how individual people can put pressure on their government to do more about it.
I can maybe jump in to say a bit more about how individuals can do. In the UK, we have the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. You can visit the website, and you can find many actions that we have put out. And we would like your voice. We would like you to send the MP pledge to your MPs and sign on some of our campaigns. And also you can donate for Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign, because in the end we need everything that needs funding and money to, in order we can do more. And also the most simple thing that you can do is raise awareness to tell your friends, your neighbors, your family members. So we need a grassroots level of campaign to pressure the governments all around the world, rather than just asking what about or why, but believe in your own power and individual power. Do whatever you can, even just follow me on Twitter and retweet what I have been tweeting, for example. That can spread the words and then can raise awareness as well. So I believe individuals can do a lot. I know Michael also mentioned about 2022 Olympics, and we are hoping that this Olympic will not happen in Beijing. We know it is not that easy, but everything is possible if, you know, majority people take action. Thank you.
Can I just jump in there after Rahima, because it's a really good point about individual actions. And I know people often think, well, I can't make much of a difference. I'm standing up against this huge, powerful, wealthy state. What difference can I make? And one little example of actually people making a difference is in London or Oxford Street. There's an H&M store. It's a clothing store, for those who don't know. And there was a group of protesters who went there every week. They protested outside, and H&M have said they won't stock Xinjiang cotton anymore, and it's a huge victory by people there. So please don't sit at home and think that you can't do something. Rahima's right about the Beijing Olympics. Anybody can get onto Wikipedia and find out the sponsors and start writing to the sponsors there. Do they want their logo emblazoned across the TV screens as a genocide and crimes against humanity are taking place there as well? So I think reaching out. We did some work at Lawyers for Uyghur Rights with Huawei, the big telephone company. Huawei, the evidence shows, is deeply implicated in the repression of the Uyghur people. So this is a company, and they got so close to actually building our 5G network in the United Kingdom. It was that close to happening. The government was in support of it, but some backbenchers in the end managed to stop it. But this is a company which is promoting on Twitter. You can respond to them, you can reach out, you can talk about it. And then we sent letters to all the big phone companies, Vodafone, BT, all the companies on the high street who stock Huawei products. And they haven't given out any satisfactory response to the letter we wrote out, giving them the evidence about what's actually taking place. So it would be very powerful if the people watching wrote to Vodafone, wrote to the Olympic sponsors, and then you really can make a difference.
Fantastic. Sarab Singh has another question. He wants to know if other groups or other communities have come out in support of the Uyghurs. I know you mentioned, Michael, that Canada seems to have highlighted the issue, but are there other communities getting involved in this?
We do have a lot of different communities are with us now. There are many, like youth campaign group, Jewish community, very vocal. They're supporting, for example, this morning we went to outside Chinese embassy and it was organized by Jewish. I forgot the organization name, but it's a Jewish, European Jewish student organization. And this evening we have another event, for example, also organized by the Jewish students. So we have Muslim organizations who have been also supporting, and yeah, this is this shouldn't be limited to anyone, any religion or any different group. This is a universal issue. This is a people that facing genocide. That's why I think it is important for everyone to feel this is my duty, that, you know, I can do something. I just want to read out a very beautiful, moving statement by Olivia from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. This is what she wrote. Each and every one of us has the power to prevent genocide from developing by actively guarding against prejudice, by staying informed, and by shining the light of humanity in the places of darkness today.
Thank you. And of course, we did invite the Chinese government to take part in this, and we didn't get a reply. But Somia's put their argument into effect, and she says, China says this is being done to curb terrorism. And how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. Virtually every large country or ethnic group has people who have been involved in terrorism. The question is, how do you respond to it? So, for example, in the Uyghur case, there have been a handful of terrorist acts that appear to have been committed by Uyghurs. One very important one in 2014 that happened in a train station in Kunming, which drew a lot of attention from the Chinese public and the Chinese government. Of course, the response, it's not a normal response to put 10% of the people who share the ethnicity with those terrorist attackers into internment camps. So it really doesn't connect. If someone from ethnicity A commits a terrorist attack, then you put 10% of their population, or maybe 20%, into internment camps, take their children away, raise them as another ethnic group, etc., etc. This kind of response does not measure up. But moreover, the Chinese government has exaggerated the terrorist threat, and they really weren't that concerned about terrorism until after 2001, when the Chinese government signed on to the U.S. global war on terrorism and really brought on board a lot of U.S.-led Islamophobic ideas that Islam is connected to terrorism. Really, through that, injected it into the Uyghur case, and China then, from 2002, when it signs on to this U.S. global war on terror, begins to use terrorism as the excuse for the suppression of Uyghur cultural practices, the suppression of Uyghur freedom of movement, and ultimately now as the excuse for why they're engaged in, mass sterilization, forced labor, and mass internment.
Can I just quickly jump in there, Mandy? Because with Justice Abroad, we represent quite a few different Uyghur clients, and so I've spoken to them a lot. And there's been evidence that with the Uyghurs, when they arrest them, they ask them to choose what offence they're guilty of. So it is really just a really wide net being thrown out to seize Uyghur people. Some common denominators which can be sometimes seen, it's very difficult because the data is very difficult to get at, but often with having members of the family overseas is something which attracts attention of the authorities. But I agree with Ryan, it's just such a large scale seizure of people that it can't be based on any kind of proper evidence. And it really fits into the homogenization in China, the efforts in regards to the Mongolian people to stop them speaking in their own language, what's been happening to the Tibetan people for a very long time. So it's more focused on them as a different ethnic and religious group, more than anything to do with terrorism.
And I suppose terrorism is really that kind of that wide blanket that can be used without a lot of evidence. As a journalist myself, I guess this question is to Ryan. Is the Uyghur people have been part of the community for eons. What? I guess not why now, because you said it's been coming for a while. But what is China so afraid of that they have created these mass camps? What is the perceived threat that they see the community creates?
The forces behind this are complex. In the most practical sense, there was, leading up to, in the years of 2014 and 15, there was a rising dissent among Uyghurs and pushback against the Chinese state. That was in response to continually tightening down by the Chinese government. So, for example, you get roadblocks put up everywhere, which are still there, that Uyghurs have to go through. They had to have passes in many places. Uyghurs had to get something they called green cards to move from one place to another. So you have this cycle of the Chinese state from about 1990 onward, adding a restriction, and then when Uyghurs eventually pushing back, and then the Chinese state saying, well, this dissent is unacceptable, we need to hit them harder, and then Uyghurs protesting again. And that really reached a crescendo in 2014 and 15, when Uyghurs started doing things like taking their farm tools down to the local checkpoint and attacking the people who were harassing them day and night. And really, these mostly look like local disputes that are a product of the bigger policies. But I also want to mention that it's not just about what's happening on the ground. It's about the ideas that circulate among party officials. So on the one hand, we have, well, there are going to be lots of hands here, so I shouldn't say one hand. So we have Xi Jinping tolerates less dissent than any Chinese leader since Mao. And so there is a crackdown on dissent that's across the country, and a crackdown on difference. And that emerges from a change in China's ideologies of ethnic diversity. There used to be a commitment to promoting ethnic diversity and cultural diversity in China. That has changed to a model under Xi Jinping, and we have the reports and the documents and the speeches about this. An acceptance of an idea that ultimately China is a nationalist state and the nation is represented by Han Chinese. And how do we deal with the fact that many people in China are not Han Chinese? Well, the answer is to assimilate them, to put them in the melting pot. The melting pot doesn't make Han Chinese people more like Uyghurs in any way. It only makes the Uyghurs, the Mongols, the Tibetans, and other groups more like Han Chinese. And then finally, there's this element that I already alluded to, which is that when the Chinese state signed on to the global war on terror, they picked up a lot of Western-style Islamophobic ideas. And it's now been 20 years that their officials have been coming up through the system, learning about how Islamophobia works, and learning to associate Muslims with terrorism. And so those fruits are what we're seeing now. So it's a storm of all kinds of things. Ultimately, they add up to the Communist Party seeing the Uyghurs as a threat to their power, and they can see it that way because of this combination of racism and Islamophobia and a general renewed intolerance for dissent.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all the questions that we have time for, but I'd like to thank again Professor Ryan Thum, Michael Pollack, and Nursimah Gul, of course, and Rahit Mahmood. Next time at Open Forum, we'll be discussing the Uyghurs a bit more, but also speaking specifically to what Michael was showed us a clip about, which is that forced sterilization. But I just want to thank everyone for their time and the ability to shine a spotlight on this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.